Hello, this is Elainne Lopez, and thank you for having me in this event and presenting on behalf of the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities on State of the Nation's Climate Action with Local Perspectives. This was submitted for a mapathon to map local and national efforts addressing various climate issues to provide the useful and relevant baseline data for the current lay of the land for climate action here in the Philippines. We still hope to do that in the future because it remains, considering its timeliness and relevance, especially now that we are gearing for the implementation of our Nationally Determined Contribution, or NDC, which is our national commitment to the Paris Agreement that is to be submitted by the end of the year, and that it would require mobilizing various stakeholders in to act on climate change. As for the presentation on call for action of integrating R&D, innovations, and stakeholder collaboration in development policy and planning, I'll present our approach to climate governance with focus on local approaches, along with possible research topics that we hope to interest this specific group of people, the mappers, the engineers, and people from scientific community, technical experts, if not as new topics or could connect with your current research tracks, and also for potential collaboration to encourage more of you to engage in addressing one, if not the most challenging problem that the world is facing. And definitely the Philippines is in for even graver consequences. So the flow of the discussion, it will start with a few slides on climate change before moving to some of the research initiatives and call for action in the organization, and then before moving to the more specific, more customized gaps and suggestions that would appeal or that would be more relevant to the audience present here. So to introduce our organization briefly, ICSC is a climate and energy policy group based in the Philippines, advancing climate resilient and low carbon development. Now it's engaged with a wider international climate and energy policy arena, and it is recognized for its role in helping advance effective global climate action and the Paris Climate Agreement. So these are some of the pictures of our activities, of our engagements, and yeah, so we have our local work, we have our national, and we have our international work. So when we talk about climate change, we start our discussion with this widely circulated picture from the Twitter because of its straightforward approach to the issue, that it was able to capture or to summarize in 5 points. There's a climate science that is supporting these claims. So the 5 points are, well, it's warming, it's us, we're sure, it's bad, and we can fix it. Definitely it's warming. As a matter of fact, human activities already caused an increase of 1 degree in the global mean temperature, and we're likely to reach the 1.5 threshold between 2030 to 2050 and 2050 if we do not change our ways or under the business as usual scenario. It's us, we caused it. It's anthropogenic in nature, and it goes back to the Industrial Revolution, the steady rise in the global mean temperature. How sure are we? Very sure. As a matter of fact, from 1993 to 2003, 928 scientific papers that claimed this global climate change that we are experiencing. It's bad, not only in terms of lives lost, properties, it would endanger flora, fauna, our very survival. And despite all these negative impacts, there is still hope. That's why there is this campaign, and we can fix it if we work together in drastically reducing our carbon emissions, and if we put our joint efforts to capacitate the people to build their resilience to climate change. Climate change manifests itself in terms of climate events. So there are two types: rapid onset events and slow onset events. The rapid onset events are the extreme episodic disasters or weather events. These can be easily seen or identified in pictures, and immediately you see the loss and damages in terms of lives lost, properties, crops, etc. The other type, the slow onset events, are defined as long-term chronic hazards that are not so evident, but can be at least just as deadly as rapid onset events. These are less dramatic, they occur in longer period of time, they're harder to detect, harder to monitor. And that's the danger because it adds to the complexity of the impacts of climate change. And because of the complexity of events, both rapid onset and slow onset events, and admittedly, there's still a need to raise the awareness on slow onset events that include ocean acidification, glacial retreat, you have sea level rise, temperature rise, certification, biodiversity loss, land degradation, and salinization. Push the scientists to continue improving their existing climate models to better understand how these climate events will change and continue presenting risks. Um, and also there's the reality of committed climate change, meaning that even though we have successfully implemented all our climate strategies, basically we'll continue to experience the consequences of our actions from 20 to 30 years ago. So this slide on PAGASA's climate projections back in 2018 only shows how varied climate change can be experienced not only from one country to another, but even within the country, especially in the Philippines as an archipelago, and that there are countries that are more likely to experience climate change than other countries, making them more vulnerable to its impacts. For example, the average mean temperature could increase by as much as 2.5 to 4.1 in the Philippines under the business as usual scenario. For rainfall, Luzon and Visayas can experience increase in rainfall by 40%, but it would be a different story for sections of Mindanao, as they will experience decrease in rainfall by 40%. For tropical cyclones, there will be decrease in frequency but increase in intensity. And I think the more alarming projection is that for sea level rise, we have already experienced twice the global average, especially in eastern Visayas from 1993 to 2015. And these projections are very important because they will definitely present risks to the communities that are exposed to them. And these include, of course, flooding, both for in urban and rural areas, even including places that haven't experienced flooding before. And then the increase in temperature would definitely affect the water supply as well as the agricultural sector. That would affect the food supply. Sea level rise will affect coastal communities more, and the increase in sea surface temperature will increase the risk of coral bleaching that will also have an effect on the fishery sector and also affecting the food supply. Now, these risks are projected to happen in the future. I think not, because by just looking at those pictures in the previous slide, I think we can all agree that these are already being experienced at the current setting, and it's not only in the Philippines, but it's happening in different countries, especially in the vulnerable countries. And there is really this large claim by countries that the reality of climate change has overtaken the global discussion and action. And so it really shows that there's still disparity between action and what is happening on the ground. And so knowing that, and with communities being the frontliners in the battle against climate change, so what needs to be done? And of course, if we want to act, we have to know the problem first, we have to understand it, and in something that is grounded on climate science, uncertainty is not a friend. Thus, it calls for research methods that can anticipate and capture current and future risks that can also be validated on ground. And this is where the value of research comes in, and the role of scientific community could not be more emphasized. However, the approach could be a bit different from the usual because it should involve other actors who have a stake in the problem, which leads me to present to you some of the research initiatives that we have started in the organization. And in these researches, we bring in the local experts, we engage with local universities and HEIs to help local communities and governments in their strategies to adapt and hopefully also to mitigate their local greenhouse gas emissions. In particular, for the slow onset events research, which is a series, it discusses some of the findings of slow onset events in the Philippines to see how these can contribute to national and local policies. And another added value of the research, aside from the quantitative and qualitative data and information that these studies can provide, is the involvement of the local actors, not only in the implementation, but all the way from data gathering up to analysis and monitoring. And these local actors, they eventually become the local champions in making sure that the studies as well as the strategies to address them are integrated in their development plans with appropriate policy and resource support for implementation and sustainability. So aside from slow onset events, another research that is part of our advocacy is the research on risk transfer mechanisms, specifically weather index-based insurance, wherein we explore its viability as a climate change adaptation strategy. And this research only started last year, focusing on the state of play of risk transfer mechanisms for agriculture, especially the weather index-based insurance, and then by next year it will proceed to the local data gathering as the basis of policy recommendations on agriculture insurance for the development strategy for the weather index-based insurance. Now, I think it's very important in these research initiatives, the ICSC encountered challenges in talking about climate science because it's really technical, and even as part of the civil society actors that have been active in this campaign, we cannot discuss the technicalities of climate change unless we are guided by experts. So our main role in these studies is to be able to bridge the gap between climate science, which is the role for to be played by the experts, by the technical people, by the academe, and the climate policy, where the LGUs and the national government agencies come in to inform national policymakers. So all these research initiatives with multi-stakeholder collaboration for strategic planning and resource mobilization is part of our bigger advocacy, which is baking in climate change into long-term development planning. And by understanding the climate events, this serves as the game changer to development planning and policy cycle as it cuts across different sectors. By baking in, we mean this understanding should translate into practical planning parameters, constraints, and trade-offs. And in economic terms, the language of resources, it should open opportunities or create opportunities to spur wider economic transformation. Baking in climate lens, local realities must be turned into climate governance action. So the climate events that are experienced at the local level should be the basis of building climate resilience, wherein the local information serves as its foundation of communities in order to identify and understand the problems and its relationship with local circumstances. Also to identify potential solutions that must cut across sectors, and that these solutions should also include planning for resources. Of course, as a cross-cutting issue in itself, climate change should be acknowledged and treated as gender-specific, meaning it is not a gender-neutral phenomenon. Therefore, it should raise aspects of gender-specific impacts. And in relation to the nationally determined contribution, again, our commitment to the Paris Agreement, local implementation is very crucial in turning the NDCs into reality. And we can only have a better NDC or more ambitious targets in our NDC if it connects with local and other subnational efforts that should inform national climate action. Now, the following slides are just some of the ideas that we see as gaps, that can be addressed through expansion and upscaling climate research and planning. So, starting with adaptation, there is a need to match the initiatives with where the risks are. And this could be done through mapping of local efforts, along with mapping available climate spatial data or information, such as sea surface temperature. And having this spatial representation of where the efforts are, where the risks are, this would also help NGOs and other actors to identify critical areas to slow onset event impacts that need to be prioritized for future local engagements. And that would still incorporate, or that would still require ground validation and for local climate action strategic planning. Specific to weather index-based insurance, there is a persisting demand on technical assistance in developing geographical insurance units, which will be the basis of the payout schemes. And it's important that these payout schemes address the issue of basis risks, which come from, say, the effect of topography on changing the circumstances instead of depending on the weather and climate data from the agreement stations alone. So those different factors coming in together present the basis risks that must be addressed so that the weather index insurance would be more effective and it would have an optimal payout scheme. So for mitigation, there is a need to map potential resources and capacities, impacts and means of implementation and support. So starting with the available RE resources in the country, as well as the technological innovations in terms of, say, harnessing RE technology, RE for electricity. It could also help in LGUs in integrating their mitigation analysis in climate action planning, building capacities for local GHG inventories and estimates to complement national targets. And for the national government, these maps could inform what would be the requirements for the country to implement and meet its targets as committed in the NDC. And then not forgetting the need for just gender responsive plans and initiatives wherein there are still information and data gaps to link gender and climate change for analysis, to go beyond the documentary requirements in the form of sex disaggregated data, which could be more substantial if used for analysis, to result to climate action that empowers both men and women, not only in terms of economic opportunities, but also in advancing sexual reproductive health and rights. And so all this effort of engaging various stakeholders is also our call for action that climate governance should encourage multi-actor partnerships for cooperation involving your localities, the policymakers, the people, the different stakeholders, the resources, not only in terms of finance, but also the knowledge and the capacities available. And of course, for the science part, it should also involve the academia and the research institutions so as to be able to use the best available science as the basis of climate action. So all these solutions are not rocket science because these are current initiatives that we can learn and build on by working together. Yeah, so I'm going to wrap up my discussion just to reiterate the urgent call for ambitious climate action. So this is in relation to an initiative of the Climate Vulnerable Forum to call on countries to submit their NDCs before the year ends. The name of the event, which is Midnight Climate Survival.
The Climate Vulnerable Forum, the CVF, is an international partnership of 48 developing countries and 1.2 billion people that are highly vulnerable to a warming planet. The forum serves as a South-South cooperation platform to safeguard the 1.5-degree goal by enhancing the urgency for global ambition for concrete climate adaptation and mitigation action for vulnerable countries and communities. We are at the precipice of surpassing 1.5 with dire consequences. The CVF launches a Midnight Survival Deadline initiative for the climate, calling all nations to commit to new action with upgraded national contributions, or NDCs, by midnight on December 31st of this year, as required by the Paris Agreement. All our futures are counting on it.
And that ends my presentation. I hope I was able to convey a clear message that many opportunities await for people like you in the development sector, especially in the climate advocacy. And I hope I was able to impart some new insights or topics that you might be interested to explore further, either individually or through collaborations. Feel free to share your thoughts and questions. Just send a message to Elainne at icsc.ngo. Thank you for listening.